Well, there's a new poll out by Abacus. You've heard me talk about that pollster before. They're a liberal-oriented firm, so I'm a little bit cautious of what they report. But when they report news and do a poll that shows the Liberals in a terrible light, which their latest poll does, I tend to take it seriously because they wouldn't say that if it weren't the case. I've never seen a poll this starkly in favor of the Conservatives. In fact, it suggests a Conservative Party majority. I see that the Liberals are trailing badly across most of the country, even Ontario. For the first time in memory, the Conservative Party actually has a lead amongst women. Even Atlantic Canada is pretty much split. And the demand for a change is enormously high. You might recall that it's this same firm that detected 81% of Canadians wanted a change. Well, Justin Trudeau's no dummy. He won in 2015, 2019, and 2021 because he pays close attention to the polls. And if his party is despised, and if it's going down in the polls and people want change, well, change he'll give them. He won't replace himself, of course, but he replaced an enormous number of cabinet ministers. Some of them were achingly awful and had to be replaced. Others, I think he's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. But what will it mean for your tax load? Because I think economics are one of the reasons that people want to change. Inflation, mortgage rates, the cost of living, things are tougher than ever. An enormous number of Canadians are one paycheck away from disasters. And God forbid, if they lost their job or were off work for a single pay period, they simply wouldn't be able to make ends meet. People are scared, and it's money issues again, even though Trudeau likes to work on cultural Marxist divisions. Well, who do we talk to if we want to know about how the new cabinet will hit our pocketbook? There's only one group I trust on that. And you know who I'm talking about. It's the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, because they do not take any money from the government. So when they speak on these matters, they speak in a nonpartisan way. In fact, what I like about them is they sometimes criticize the Conservatives too. And joining me now via Skype from Ottawa is our friend Franco Terrazzano with the latest on this Liberal cabinet shuffle. Franco, good to see you again. I saw a tweet by you today. Let me read it. I thought it was a good point. You said, total salary cost of Trudeau's cabinet, $11,310,000, and you compared it to years past. Last year was $10 million, the year before $9 million, the year before $7 million. I mean, the election before $7 million. You're pointing out that we're paying more than we ever have for a cabinet, but that's pretty crooked timber in this cabinet. Take it away, Franco.
Well, yeah, the reason we're paying more for this cabinet is more ministers with bigger salaries. Now, doesn't that just always seem to be the case with this government? More coming from Canadian taxpayers. What's not more? The value that we're getting, right? Because let's not also forget that the Trudeau, since he took office back, after the 2015 election, he's hired more than 98,000 bureaucrats, ballooning the size of the bureaucracy by 40%? Now, is anyone out there getting 40% more value from the federal government?
Yeah.
No. Maybe the only thing we're getting that's 40% more is 40% more wait times every time we try to get a passport renewed.
Yeah. And just disaster in airports, really all the practical things that the government's responsible for. Now, I take the point of your tweet that we have the biggest, flabbiest cabinet ever. And I think it's also true to say that a lot of those cabinet ministers aren't really running the show. I think Trudeau has an approach that he wants to show a diversity, an ethnic and a demographic and a geographic diversity in his cabinet for PR's sake. But I think the key decisions are made in the Prime Minister's office. I really think so. We learned some of that during the Trucker Commission of Inquiry, where we learned that Marco Mendicino wasn't even consulted with key decisions. His own staff knew he wasn't the decider. Here's my point. It's gross how big the cabinet is. Trudeau's trying to shuffle the deck to say, hey, Canadians, you want change? I'll give you change. But I think the core problems are still there. Trudeau himself and his disastrous finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. I think those two people really are the core of this government. In some ways, I think Chrystia Freeland actually makes more decisions than Trudeau does. What do you think of that thesis, Franco?
Well, okay, first of all, a cabinet change, that's not what Canadians really need. What Canadians really need is a culture change from this government. And you mentioned Freeland. I'm glad you did, Because here's the thing, folks, until the government, whether it's Freeland, whether it's Trudeau, actually changes its policies, i.e., put out its fiscal dumpster fire and stop raising taxes that make everything more expensive, until the government does that, I mean, all of this is just adding lipstick onto a pig. Right? I mean, the government can, shuffle its cabinet every single day. It can pose for the camera every single day. None of that would matter until the government actually does what? Two things. Stop raising taxes. That makes everything more expensive. In fact, the whole point of the Trudeau government's and Freeland's carbon tax increases are to make your life more expensive, right? Live the way we say or pay. And the next thing that the government has to do, stop spending money like crazy. The reason Canadians are paying too much tax is because the government loves to shower itself living a lavish lifestyle on our tab.
I think there's a related point. Would you agree with this, Franco, about printing money? Because by printing so much money, they devalue the amount of money out there. It's sort of like counterfeit money. Counterfeit money dilutes the value of real money. Well, it's the same thing. The government adds billions of dollars just by printing and makes us all poorer, drives prices up. I think that's the source of inflation, isn't it? One of the sources.
It's not a source of inflation, Ezra. It's the source of inflation. Look, I'm not saying that there aren't things going on internationally, whether it's supply shortages of that nature. I'm not saying that doesn't impact it. But what that explains are changes in relative prices. But what makes all prices go up? An increase in the money supply, the printing press. And what happened during the pandemic? Well, in the 2 years between March 2020 to March 2022, the central bank, the Bank of Canada, printed about $370 billion right out of thin air, and then dropped all that freshly printed cash into an economy that was essentially locked down by government fiat. What does that do? Too many dollars chasing too few goods. And to tie the bow on this, Ezra, what was the Bank of Canada largely purchasing? Government of Canada debt. Okay, that is using the printing press to finance Ottawa's deficits. It's the inflation tax, and it's why your life is more expensive.
You know, the other day, Chrystia Freeland was on a panel with a lot of foreign media, and she boasted that Canadian inflation they finally whipped it, and she was so proud of herself. But that wasn't quite true, was it?
Inflation in Canada has come down. You didn't ask me about this, Matt. I can't believe it, okay? Inflation, we had our inflation number on Tuesday, 2.8%. Isn't that great? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, we are now within the Bank of Canada's target range. This is huge. It's come down from 8.1% last June.
Okay, so whenever you hear those headlines like inflation is cooling, this is what it actually means, folks. And you already know this, right? Because if you're not living under a rock, if you've left that rock to go to a gas station or a grocery store in the last, couple of years, you know that this is the case. In 2022, we had 40-year high inflation. 40-year high inflation. And now inflation is cooling to 2.8%. What does that really mean? Well, if you trust the government numbers, let's take it at face value for the sake of it. It means inflation was a 40-year high last year, and prices are still going up by another 2.8%.
It's still inflating.